I had to unmute.
Okay, now I'm speaking. Welcome, namaste. This is our Saturday global satsang, whatever time zone you are in.
We welcome you.
We welcome you. All right, so many faces. Okay, namaste, welcome. So as I told the AV crew here, this is a topic I have not quite dread, but trepidation about stepping into. It's like I'm walking into a room with set mousetraps. So part of this has to do with the depth, the complexity of the topic about sex and the spiritual path, right? I look back and I said, why did I ever choose that topic? You know, but I tend to keep myself true to my promises. So I figured there's something to be discovered in this conversation. In fact, of course, this is a vast and complex and interwoven conversation that has many components to. And now most of the work I do is with relatively mature spiritual seekers. And therefore, this issue of sex doesn't have the same ferocity as it does for younger people. And also, there is this inevitable kind of maturing that comes for us human beings when we get past that place where sex has such a dominant imperative in our lives that there becomes a more mellow relationship with it, which improves the possibilities or the opportunities sex can be. So, but what I do want to speak to is when I decided to kind of narrow the topic to, is the role sex plays on the spiritual path. And I want to make clear on something. This talk is really about that sex quality, the sex principle, the sex drive, and how it interfaces within our human body and on our spiritual development. And not so much about relationship, but they're of course interrelated. I'll do a separate talk on relationship on the spiritual path, but these are two very interrelated topics. So when it really gets down to it, it's what your purpose is. What role, what's the opportunity, and what are the problems associated with the sexual drive, sexuality, your identity as a sexual being, male, female, or anything in between. This has something to do with your readiness to claim, or in one true sense, reclaim the truth of yourself. So it's your purpose. You might say it's the innate aspiration of the innate faith that comes with you, like the reason you're alive. And there's a lot of reasons why people come to the spiritual path. Some people come because life is so miserable or so frightening and disturbing. They look for refuge in something other than the human condition. There are some people who seek because the love of knowledge, of the learning, of the discovery of themselves as consciousness enables and enriches their ability to be in life. And there are those who come to the spiritual path for the wealth of the spiritual experience. And I want to point to that a little bit, because the ratio of our sexual issues is associated with our material nature. And the quality of what we are as consciousness is that which supersedes and precedes our material nature. So it has a below and above. So the balance between our spirit and our matter is a very real factor. So when one is seeking knowledge, this separation is closed a little bit. One is seeking relief from suffering, it doesn't care to leave, it'll be perfectly happy to leave the material life behind. It wants to get out of suffering. And when it's out of suffering, it feels it restores itself for periods of time. But of course, it's not an ultimate solution, it's an interim solution, because that which suffers is tied up into the material nature. So learning how to bring these two together through in these struggles. So when we come to the spiritual wealth, what happens is spiritual wealth enhances the quality of material life, because the more we're connected with spirit in matter, the more matter takes on a spiritual quality. And therefore, every aspect of life is enhanced by that spiritual quality. So those who are seeking on the spiritual path for wealth are really looking to enrich their material life so that there is greater equanimity and greater moderation and greater capacity to enjoy and be in life. So I would say that most spiritual people are seeking that spiritual wealth to somehow bring it in to their material life, so there's less suffering, so that the good parts last longer and the bad parts are shorter, right? Who wouldn't want that? That's called happy human. So I know a lot of people come on the spiritual path to become a happy human. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a completely valid reason to come on the spiritual path. And then there are those who come to know the self, who actually have a capacity to know directly the self. And those people have discovered that all richness, all fulfillment, all lasting permanence comes by knowing the self. And when we become established in that self, and when I say established, that's an important conversation, because sex is one of the greatest distractions from establishing that, if it still is running us in immature ways. Then we can be in the right relationship with the matter, and the two then are in balance. They brought together. And yes, of course, matter will rule sometimes more, spirit will rule some other times. Now, this is what the Bhagavad Gita points to in the 6th chapter. It points to this place of right relationship. So I wanted to read from the 6th chapter. So you can begin to look into yourself to see what is it that motivates your seeking. And I'm going to speak of the next type of seeking. But first I want to address this, because most people, there's many new people here, relatively speaking, and even those who are with me are at different places on the journey, have been engaged in different ways with different traditions, and therefore I don't want to come out with just one perspective on this, but I do want to describe this kind of interim harmony that can come on the spiritual path, which in the Bhagavad Gita is described in the 6th chapter, where one becomes stable in the self. All right, starting with chapter 248. In this way, when the yogi is able to still the mind and is established in the self, he realizes supreme peace known as nirvana, and finally, ultimately will attain me. Arjuna, those who eat too much or too little, who sleep too much or do not sleep at all, cannot attain success in yoga. Yoga removes all sorrow for one who's temperate in food and recreation, is self-controlled, detached from the fruit of work, who has regulated their sleep and waking state. And in this way, when the seeker through controlled mind develops a natural dispassion for objects of pleasure, and his consciousness rests only on the self, he attains the yoga siddhi state. That's the merger with the self. There is nothing wrong with sex. There's nothing wrong with food. There's nothing wrong with a relationship. There's nothing wrong with money. There's nothing wrong with material enjoyment if we have the right relationship with them. Okay, now each of you are going to be the one who makes the call on what is that relationship and what is the role that balances out your unique kind of seeking. So when I start talking about the role sex plays on the spiritual path, you may find yourself at different places in this conversation. So most spirituality in the West and even in India is about coming to this place of equanimity, of balance, of stability. It's called Sthiti Prajan. That means the intelligence is stable in its way it's holding and experiencing existence. It doesn't go through the same fluctuations that it did before when the gunas were determining our moods. And the gunas were determining what we could see or not see, where we were veiled from the structures of ourselves that were shaping our relationship with existence. So it's when we come to some degree of responsibility, a significant degree of responsibility as an individual, recognizing that we are the ones who are in charge of our happiness or our fulfillment or the temporariness or the stability of what has come to us spiritually. So when we're at that place, we have found an important equanimous balance between the matter and spirit within us. Now, that too is not a permanent state. Where maybe a human being lives their life like this, a spiritual being will live their life like this. There'll be cycles, there'll be easier, there'll be transitions. Something will die, you'll go into suffering, you learn to deal with the issue, and then you come out of the suffering and you restore yourself. This point where what happens is when we're overtaken by the patterns in our nature that still defeat us, but automatically return at some point to the stability of a self, is the point of no return. It is a point where we have become able to undo our karma rather than perpetuate our karma or our inclinations and our habits and our structures. And that relationship means eventually the self, this relationship with spirit, is that spirit then is playing the role of lifting matter into another vibration that wasn't possible before. And this is probably where most of my work is. It's when we come out of this individual relationship with the self and our being and our relationship with ourselves as individuals in existence and start moving into universal relationship to principles that our self is simply a piece of, a quality of consciousness or being, a greater being or greater beings that are greater than ourselves. Now, when we enter into that domain of making a transition from our individual right relationship and we open up to the spiritual infinite possibilities, well, our body is starting to start, and all the drives and all the programming and all the habitual structures are going to have to start being transformed in order for that path, that second part of the path, so the universal journey can complete itself. And it's in this gap that all the issues with sexuality, all the trauma with spiritual teachers, we work with Marianne and Kaplan. She works primarily with traumas with spiritual teachers and their students. 90% of the problems are with males, and 90% of the problem is sex. Now, that could be because that was my generation where sex was elevated into a much higher status than it deserved. But it is a recognition that it is when spirit calls us to a higher place, when it's calling us to something beyond nature, beyond our programming, beyond the way that we thought was the right way to be. We create a new Dharma, a new way to live. And that ultimate outgrowth is where the ego starts losing. It's where what has shaped our sense of self has to be dismantled. It has to become humble, open, porous. It cannot keep clinging and demanding something of us, because the demand of spirit then becomes more intense and requires more of us than the demands of matter. Okay, so that's the context of what we're talking about. So part of this has to understand the nature of sex and the spiritual path, because the principle that this category, so we're going to look at. I mean, I began to write notes about this conversation, and it was like pages and pages of notes. And I said, oh shit, I'm never going to get this in one talk. And I know that what we're really interested in is what is my relationship with sex and the spiritual path. So I really want to try to get to that, because it has a lot to do with your previous relationship with your programming and your conditioning around sex, right? Sex is not evil. Food is not evil. None of it. It's what we do with that, either because of our programming and conditioning or our own addictions and habits that we have fed and indulged. And we live in a culture that has basically made matter God. It's made matter God. And spirit is secondary. The only reason spirit comes in to make matter more enjoyable, more pleasurable, last longer, right? The whole field of Tantra has been misinterpreted from the vantage point where matter is God and spirit is only to assist matter. Now there's another Tantra where it goes the other way, where spirit is God and matter learns to become more spiritualized. But much of the convenient, happy tantric teachers, it's about how to make your sex better, how to make your relationships better, how to feel better about yourself. That's how to feel, like you can indulge yourself and not feel guilty or ashamed, and create all kinds of strategies that the ego comes in and lays claim to about what's right and what's not right, and what some teachers say and what other teachers say. And God forbid you ever talk about celibacy. So this whole paradigm that we've been habituated in and that we're constantly bombarded by is shaping what really in the eternal path was not even a question, right? If you eat too much food, spirit's going to be diminished. It's just how it is. You have too much sex, spirit's going to be diminished. If you put all your attention on your food and its enjoyment and to keep it always there with you, you're going to lessen the spiritual component of your system. So it's what you give power to, what you make important, what you emphasize, that plays the role of, impacts the role of spirit in your own awakening. All right. So, when we talk about the unfolding of the individual coming into life, we really talk about a process of natural maturation. And it's inevitably, we're all going to go encounter that territory of our own sexuality, and either in enjoyment and discovery or in pain and anguish and shame and diminishment. And we all carry the wounding of whatever happened to us as a child, as a woman, or as a man in the early formations of that, and what our parents demonstrated, what they showed about that whole pattern. So all of us are going to carry some of this content to varying degrees, and maybe your strategy had been to just bypass the whole conversation, just get busy in other things, take your sexual energy and subliminate it and get busy at work and be accomplished in school and bypass the whole structure of whatever is remaining. And that brings you some relative peace. Yes, you're an obsessive workaholic, right? But you don't have sex as an issue, as a driving force in your life. And there's other areas, arts, the creative field can take the sexual energy and convert it into creative energy, because it basically rises up, sex drive, rises up from the body's natural impulses that comes up to be fed and then quiet back down when it's complete, and so on and so forth. Just like food, just like thirst, just like sleep, it is part of the natural cycle of our lives that comes and arises from the body. Where was I going with that? Well, it's this idea of learning to recognize that the role it plays is also learning to recognize that this is nature. That's part of the physical design, the biochemistry. And it was really imperative for nature, for the creation, for even the species or any species to reproduce. And therefore, the sex drive is actually an essential drive, even though our survival is not necessarily dependent on it. If you don't have air, you die very quickly. You don't have water, you die not as quickly, but you do die fairly quickly. If you don't have food, then it may be weeks or months, but you will die from lack of food. But when you get to, or sleep, there's another one. If you don't get enough sleep, your system could become dysfunctional. But sex doesn't have, you can live life without sex. So it doesn't have the same apparency of survival. But it has an apparency in terms of our fulfillment in our relationship with existence, especially with the male and female relationship, which is nature's design to have men and women, or the masculine feminine principle in each of us, be attracted to that in another. And in that coming together in relationship, nature can reproduce herself. So even if you don't love each other, the sex drive will bring you together because nature will have that happen. Now, human beings have done something in that paradigm of just the drive that you don't see in nature. I mean, in India, there's a part of the road heading into town where you drive through all the monkeys. Okay, and they're everywhere. They're playing with each other and then climbing on trees, or they're fighting, and they're having sex. And you watch how they have sex. It takes about 3 to 5 seconds. There is the courtship is simply just a turning. One dominates, one submits, and done. No, where are you? And have you called me? And why haven't you called me back? And how come you're not giving me the attention that I'm wanting to give I'm giving you? And how come all of this? Okay, so you got it. You know, there's a mechanical part of this, and it's a hardware and then software. We humans have taken this little piece of hardware and made it into this huge software. All our drama, all our stagecraft, all our music, all our belaying tragedies, and are around this creation that human beings have done with this damn little functional thing that, you know, at best lasts maybe 10, 15 minutes for the function itself. So we got something to do with the distortion that sex is on the spiritual path, because we're born into a milieu where everybody is being affected by this underlying foundational structure, which comes from nature. That is the how to succeed part of existence. And it drives us into relationship with each other if we like it or not. And men and women don't particularly like each other. So we always have to work it out. So we need sex to keep us together long enough that the species can survive. And we're failing in that even now as we become more intelligent and more aware that we've created a lot of shit about this stuff. So what do we do on the spiritual path? Well, the first thing we do is deflate the software. We start dismantling the thing where we made something that's quite simple and clean and automatic and natural, and we get and take out all those distortions, the jealousies, competitions, the vengeance, the tribal structures based on, you know, betrayal and all of that. And we get right down to, what is it? What is sex? Well, if you get right down to what is sex, it gets really in your body, not in your emotional nature, not in your mind, but in your body. You'll discover that the sexual energy is a form of bliss. It's bliss in your body. Now, maybe in men more than women, but the bliss wants an outcome. But if you just hold it as bliss, hell, you got some bliss, right? It's pretty nice to have bliss. Life is full of stuff. Bliss isn't usually part of it. Excitement, anger, resentment, worry, fear, all that. But bliss brings us to some quality of peace, right? Because we deflate the story. We deflate the drama. And we experience what sex actually is. It's an event that occurs in our body. And it creates this arousal. It's an arousal. And I would like to invite you to understand that sex actually serves a role in the spiritual path if we can take it out of the old paradigm of the matter that we've lived to and all the conditions and stuff we've added to it into the simplicity of its experience. Now, this is what many tantric teachings do. And as a matter of fact, many tantric teachings around sexual tantric teachings is to restrain the release. and to simply stay in the arousal. And there's a certain intelligence about that. Because, once you're really with the sexual desire, the bliss, it completes. It quiets. Or, and if it isn't, you can use that sexual desire and you can direct it. You can use your consciousness. You can use your spiritual consciousness to direct the bliss up or down in your body. So when the arousal comes, you can actually share it. Take it out of just the genitals, take it out of that kind of whole organic kind of mishmash that gets activated with the sexual arousal and direct it up the Kundalini channels or down, grounding you into the earth with that bliss. And you begin to clear out and bliss size. Bring forward bliss into parts of yourself. This could be very relaxing and very pleasurable. And a matter of fact, Tantric Yoga is how to have, when the arousal comes, to use it and to preserve it for as long as it lasts. Because it won't last forever. Any arousal is either an inward cycle or an outward stimulation. So if it's an inward cycle, if you pull back from outward stimulation, if you withdraw your consciousness from the objects of your attention, and you just stay with yourself, then you'll notice that your sexual drive will come up in its own natural cycles. And then when they come up, they will have their time. And if you can learn to manage when they're up, you can convert that into something that starts awakening your body through that component of that current of existence that lives us that we call Ananda. Ananda is the bliss of being. Ananda is the joy of existence. Ananda has all these characteristics, but when you put on it the sexual structure, it is this tangible, embodied, orgasmic quality that is unique for those who get to have a body. When you lose your body, you don't get to have that orgasmic quality. You'll have a other body's quality of that, but it won't be your body's quality of that. And I'll talk about that some more. So when we're with ourselves, and that we discover there's a natural cycle. But if we look outward for stimulation, then what we're doing is we're intervening in that natural cycle so that when it's gone down, we're stimulating it to go back up. So we're exaggerating a cycle that is likely to be much longer than the one that's fed by outer stimulation. So when you're looking at a beautiful woman or a handsome man, or if you're attracted to this person or that person, or the characteristics of their body, or that men very much sight is the trigger for arousal. So if you're actually looking to be in arousal that's fed from the outer world, you're going to create a restlessness in that and an inability to be in the right relationship with your natural cycle. So pulling back from that tendency, then you can kind of put sex into the right relationship. So I recommend to people who are with me is not to look at porn, not to feed the part of you that is addicted to stimulation in that area. And by pulling back from that, be able to feel the arousal as an experience in your body. Okay, so that's the practical application of the right relationship on the spiritual path. Now, there inevitably are going to be egoic structures associated with your sexuality. There's inevitably going to be the trauma and the conditioning of the world, humanity, and your piece of it that came through your mom and dad and their parents and your uncles and your cousins and your siblings. And that's all going to be there with this sexual arousal energy. That's either a strategy for avoiding or a strategy for uncovering those parts of ourselves that are still twisting this piece of our physical existence and making it into something it's not. Making it more than it is. And there's the other strategy of making it less than it is. Neither of those work in the long term. Even I was celibate for 18 years. At some point, I recognized that I had been unwittingly missing out a whole part of my embodiment by not including sexuality in that. Yes, I experience consistently the Kundalini. So I am in basically a near orgasmic relationship in my body almost all the time. But that stability didn't come until I got beyond sex, beyond my human consciousness investment in that pattern. Then what happened is that inward endless flow of Satchitananda in the body is a continuous flow of bliss. See, when my awakening first happened in 1998, I was 50 years old. I had already come to the self. I didn't know it, but I had already come to the self. And I was in a perfectly natural relationship with sex. Satchitananda was my favorite partner in that. And this was exactly what we loved to do. And it had its own cycles. And there was no issues in my mind about that. But when I awakened, someone invited me to consider being celibate. And it was good advice, because what I awakened to was the domains of subtle sex. Because what came in after my first day, the first day was just a blowout. But a week later, what came in was the Divine Mother came in, and she showed me in about a 6 or 7 hour experience what orgasmic life was. I was experiencing everything on the planet that was having sex at that moment in my body for 6 to 7 hours. So that means I got overloaded with that meeting, that component of my system that sex is associated with, in ways I had never imagined, and it basically blew it out. Just blew it out. And that was my first introduction to the Ananda, the divine Shakti, the mother principle of the creative force. And she said to me when this was happening, she didn't use words, but it was a clear, obvious demonstration of what was showing me, as everything on the planet was reproducing at that second. She says, this is me. This is what I am. I am life. I'm existence. I am the newness of physical matter. I am the reproduction, the endless restoring of the opportunity of life. So it's coming from the physical vital. And it was magnificent and wonderful and humbling. Tears were pouring down my eyes the whole time I was having all these experiences in my body. Now, I had no idea such a thing existed. And I got to tell you, even though I knew right when it faded away, I had no way of laying claim to it. I knew that, I'm not in charge of this. But I had already had two kinds of experiences. Then I had the third, and then I had the fourth. And about every week, I was having another exposure to these universal forces. And they all brought with them this very tangible Ananda component that was related to some extent to the sex drive. And because of my natural openness with sex at that stage of my life, there wasn't a lot of obstruction. But when someone said, you should try celibacy, what I discovered is these things stayed longer. They lasted. And there was something that in this quality where the sex converted into spiritual Shakti that taught me that in order for it to stay, I had to separate myself or start dismantling the habit of releasing the energy, the attention that I would give to that activity of sexual release, orgasm. And then in the process, this coming and going became not coming and going, but rather this movement of relationship with what was coming that was growing. Yes, it was also going, but it was each time it came, it took me to a place that I hadn't been before. And when it left, I was still in a place higher than where I'd been before. So it was this coming and going that was in an upward movement. When I went to India, this continued. And when this process happened, this Kundalini Shakti became the engine, the means by which my consciousness was able to traverse the subtle lower planes of spirit. These are the vital dimensions, subtle physical, subtle vital world, where sex can become a fabric of that whole plane And if you've not come to the right relationship, it converts matter into the sexual drive in our human system way out of proportion to what it was as a human being, because it's being enhanced by this greater and greater expanding spiritual force coming through our bodily experience of what we now know as the Kundalini Shakti. Learning to manage this is what allowed for my steady progression in those years. But eventually, even with that, it was not enough, because I was still in the spiritual experiential component. I was in devotion. Everything that was happening in my body was felt and experienced in my physical body and my vital body. So there was this continuous enhancing of spirit through those parts of myself. It wasn't necessarily true. Certainly everybody travels this path differently, but I'm sharing from my own experience the role it played. At some point, it was about 2004. So I've been on the path 6 years with this complete celibacy. No, there was a strong urge. The pattern of the old nature was still there. And sometimes it was insane in terms of how intense it was. But by just staying with it, I was expanding my ability to tolerate bliss. My body became a more and more capable vessel to access that self-existent current of Satchitananda that arises from Ananda. Consciousness waking up and missed Ananda into the absolute. And that was what happened. And after 6 years, that's when the samadhis started coming, which would last for days. When they would come, I would disappear. And that was me entering beyond the experiential into the awareness. And I knew at the moment it first happened that it was senior and more important, greater and more true than all that I experienced before. And that then became further strengthened, because it too would come and go. It too would come and go. But now, once this truer force, this powerful force of spirit came in, it started dismantling those parts of my structure. And I assure you, I had to go through these subtle domains that are below human levels in order to purge out what was left in my collective human embodiment associated with sex. And these were the dark domains. I could not have even been willing to have them come up until this greater consciousness had come to me. And then I was able to see them and not get overtaken, and to recognize the treachery and the danger and the destructiveness that these structures carry. And then eventually that led me to a place where I became stable. When I became stable, it doesn't mean the bliss went away. The bliss never went away. It stayed there, but the truth was more important. This force of Sat became more important. Okay, so those of you who are looking to strive for the highest possibility, this structure, finding a relationship with sex, which takes you beyond the natural drives. But what are the natural drives? There's the 3 gunas. And what does the Gita point to? Going beyond the 3 gunas. And what is the secret of going beyond the 3 gunas? Is to know that, to find that you are the source of the fulfillment that you looked for or found outside of yourself. And in that process, that greater reality that we all are starts manifesting in the person of you. Okay, I guess I said it. And I know this conversation is wide-ranging, because I'm in this Gestalt state. I look at anything, everything reveals itself. So I know the listening I'm talking to, and I know the complexity and the variety of the listening I'm talking to. So I do want you to please feel to just take from this what's aligned with your own purpose, and that would be the question. That would be your own. The opportunity of this meeting is both what is in your way and coming into the right relationship with the self, both as a spiritual awakened being, and also how capable are you willing to go utterly beyond nature, beyond the drive of the self, of the innate nature, in order to attain a more supreme state. But I need to put this in before I'm done here, and that is, after some years, actually about 12, 13 years, I recognized that it was done. It was done. 9 years, I recognized it, but it became integral around 12 years when I was doing this work. And I recognized that my job was actually to come back into the part of my person that I didn't have to deal with to get there, but which would then become part of my manifestation, where I could enter into the domains of structures that aren't my own, that are maybe inherited, but were not actualized this life, didn't show up this life. And I could mean the aspects of the collective consciousness. And that's when I recognized that sexuality had a role to play in that process, and discovered what that is. But never again did it have, as I entered into it from this higher consciousness, it became a transformed recognition of the structure of the person that I was before my awakening, and coming to greater responsibility in my relationship with my partner who isn't in the same spiritual place, so that I could actually discover what it is in this new human embodied condition where sex is included. So there is a role to play, even at the end of the journey, if your mission is the same as the Bhagavad Gita, which is to bring it into the world. And we have to meet it in ourselves, because we can serve the world proportional to our own embodiment. How we've been able to move the remaining darkness, resistance, fears, survival, needs, compulsions, strategies that are still there as the echo of the personality you're re-inhabiting. Okay, all right. So now let's open the floodgates and let's see what comes forward. I'm sure we can dive into different aspects of this, depending upon whatever's there for you. Anywhere is perfect. Where you are is perfect. Your willingness to share it may take courage, but it'll contribute to this entire conversation. I really do invite you to stay with yourself with this, and not about asking questions about what do I mean by that, or what do I mean by this. You can listen to this again. And if you listen to this and read the Bhagavad Gita and read that, the basic premise of all my teachings is there's a purpose for our awakening. And it's more than having better sex, more than even having better relationship. So in this context, I invite you to keep an inquiry with yourself, what's there, and what is the questions that arise from your own struggle to come to the right relationship with this conversation. The whole process of sex and transformation. Okay, how are we doing?
First up, we have Gabriel.
Gabriel.
Hello.
Hello,
Hey.
Gabriel. Namaste.
Caroline, how are you?
Caroline, not Gabriel, but Gabriel is here.
I know there's Gabriel.
Yeah. All
Like,
right.
that's not Gabriel.
Hi.
Hey,
Hi, good to see both of you.
thank you, you too.
Oh, what's your name again?
Caroline, right?
Caroline. Thank you.
I'm the one who remembers the names.
Yeah. I remember you. She remembers the name.
So my question was, and to me it kind of relates with what you've been talking to, but what about kids?
Correct. It is an individual decision, and it depends proportional what your purpose is.
Mm.
Now, children, I can tell you from experience, I had a very difficult son. He died young, and I went through the whole torturous process of, a child you love deeply going south. I knew I learned more about myself and life through that process than anything else, but I wasn't awakened. I mean, I had a psychic quality of my appreciation of spirit and God and all that, but I didn't have an awakened quality of those. So I have to put it into your court. If when I look at someone and I look at their maturity level on the spiritual path, it's directly proportional to their human maturity.
They have a little girl, right, Charlie?
Yeah.
You have a,
No.
oh, you don't have kids. Okay,
Okay.
somebody else does.
All right.
I try to keep track. I didn't have everything right.
So yeah, if you had already had kids, there's no question. But if you didn't, if you still have choice, then the question is being in touch with those parts of yourself that are still wanting to fulfill that feminine biological design, right?
Mm.
I can assure you, you're here because you've been a woman and had children many times. You have had children, raised them, suffered them, saw them die, died before them, saw them abandoned. We've all done this many, many times. So do we need to do it again this life? And is it a biological cycle? Because it comes in cycles. Or will it serve the development of me as an individual human being? So that is what I invite you to look at. Now, when someone comes to me individually, then I may give some instructions, but you're not at that place yet. So right now you're drawing from the energy and you're learning the teachings and you're bringing it into your life. And that's an important stage. So you have to follow your own truth. And what is, for me, the thing that makes it most important is when you discover the relationship of that relative to your purpose. Because whenever you make something more important than your purpose, then your purpose is going to lose out proportional, because we only have a certain amount of attention. If you put attention to a child, it's 20, 30 years. There it is. You're going to be in the karmic world, in the dutiful role as a mother, and go through the lessons that will bring you, and the diminishment. And you're going to have some kind of compromise on the fulfillment of your purpose until that time is complete. Now, how much is relatively speaking, but the principle is that's a call you make. And it's got to be a sincere inquiry, because this isn't just about sex, right? This is about really kind of fulfilling the imperative that every woman carries, which is a very, she carries the burden of a birth of a child, where the man could just get her off. The woman carries the biological event of having a child, and their nature designed it this way. So having a child is then you take on that piece of the human embodiment in the material dimension, and you own it as an opportunity for you as a spiritual being to mature this life and come to greater authority only for the purpose of being able to fulfill your purpose. Now, this purpose I'm speaking about is not just like your own enlightenment, as in my teaching. It's about how you can be useful. So having sex is a very self-involved process, right? The sexual event itself throws us into our body, which can be very good, but it's really about our getting off, or our getting our fulfillment, or our getting being met in that level of intimacy, right? So it brings us back into ego. And the part of our ego that's still tied into our body, which, by the way, is also temporary. Not something apparent to us always, but it will come and go. So part of this has to do with your willingness to be able to stay out of your ego. The Bhagavad Gita says, and even in the earlier chapters, in chapter 3, it says any action that's a sacrifice brings you to me, because that sacrifice is me operating through you. Now, nature designed some parts of these sacrifice. To having a child is one way. You have the delight of having a child and the sacrifice of raising the child and enduring their process, and you meeting that as a responsible agent in that relationship. And then you have the responsibility that comes when you awaken, which is greater than nature, because it's my teaching that we awaken for the world, that the reason we awaken is to get over ourselves and become useful to the world, not to just keep getting a better version of the payoff of our old self. So if you talk to me, you probably know what I would say. So don't talk to me. Don't ask me this question. Okay? because I'm going to call everybody up to what I need as many generals, corporals, lieutenants, sergeants, and privates for the battle that's coming forward. So anybody comes to me, I'm calculating how you can serve this manifestation I'm bringing. So don't ask me. Ask me, then if I give you a direction, you're stuck. You're going to have to follow it, because if you don't, your connection with me, you will separate yourself from me.
But with children, he does not give direction.
Yeah.
He leaves that up to you. And he and I have a basic disagreement with this conversation.
She had one wonderful daughter and a painless birth. I mean, who wouldn't want more kids, right?
Well, I look at Cybron and Marika, and they're raising Livia, and I point to them as an example for, you know, two very spiritual people raising a child. So there is an example in the Sangha of someone doing that.
Anyone who comes in with a child, it's very clear. You have a woman especially has the ordained duty of going through whatever the cost of that, of the sacrifice that child will have in your life. And if you consciously choose that, then and you're awakened, then it can be a very powerful means of taking you to a greater place of usefulness, especially in a partner where you have a partner with you. Because in a partnership, which we'll talk about next time, then something of the burden is shared, and the possibility of both of you together fulfilling your purpose is more available to you through that relationship. Because and that's what Savitri and Satyamanu recognize, is that they are currently engaged in this work, and they have this wonderful new being that's coming into existence. So there is no harm to also choose that. Okay, balance. There it is. Got two sides. That's why she's in the room, right?
Well, and you know, the other side's like, I never planned to have children, and I had Sonia. So, you know, if it's meant to be, it happens. That's really my experience of it. So, and and it was a very powerful thing for me too, in many different ways, because though she was fairly easy, she's not that easy. She's 37 now, but she was born with a birth defect. And when she was 4 months old, she had to go into surgery. And, you know, she lived, it's still, you know, present for her, even though it's not life-threatening. It's still, you never know what's going to be brought. I mean, there's another couple who are with us who their son also was born with a severe birth defect. And these are lessons you learn with children. It's not like, oh, you have this child and it's just this wonderful experience. It is all of that. And oftentimes it calls us up to a much higher place. So, yeah, but whatever, you know, it's always your choice, always.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great to see both of you.
Yes. And for all of you, the rest of you are contemplating having children, I've just
Talk to
answered your
me.
question. Yeah, talk to her. Keep away from me. Don't ask me any questions.
Thank you so much.
Okay, who's next?
Up next, we have Susanna.
Susanna.
Our Susanna.
Hi.
Hey, Susanna.
Hey.
I'm not entirely sure if I should have asked this question now or in the relationship.
Well, don't, yeah, that,
But
just do it, girl.
yeah, and I feel like there's an individual component, but also a component for the community, because I feel, at least to me, and I know a couple of others, that it feels like there is this unwritten rule about touch, and that we shouldn't. And I see how obviously that is to empower ourselves and to find that in ourselves. But I just was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, about, you know, the sex separated from the touch. Because for me individually, although I know when you point out that is something I need to find within myself, I also feel that I'm still having a very hard time finding that place, and that I actually, or actually not even me, my body is guiding me to, you need touch, you need to be held. And when I let myself, for example, by this beauty at some moment. After a small group, when I really, like, my body was just screaming for, you need to be held, and I let myself, and it turned out to be a really healing experience. So yeah, I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit, maybe.
When you separate sex from touch, you start moving into the relationship of the baby, of the unmet trauma or deprivation of you as a child. You know, touch is the first way that the baby knows it exists. If it was not held enough in its early stages, then there is this unfulfilled need, even when touch comes later. There's a strategy of protection. So this is self-healing, Susan. And this coming into self-healing is a stage of the spiritual path, because much, especially young people, live more in spirit than in their body. And so the needs of the body are not being met or seen, and it's compensating through activity or distraction or other things. So, and it could be just even shallow sex, which is a touching, but it's not nurturing, it's not necessarily healing. So coming into the right relationship with touch and being held, and the security heals the wounding that we all carry. So I would actually encourage you having structures, opportunities like you're doing right now with Angela, to be held and to be touched. And also, you know, I fully understand this. I've been married 3 times, but I've hardly had any time not married. So part of me is my validation of my life was very physical. So touch was very important to me as a developing human being. So I would, being Italian, half Italian, it also does that to you. So this idea of you meeting that as a component of yourself without it being an obstacle. Because you may have to spend some time. When we develop spiritually and the consciousness rises faster than matter, the consciousness will not be able to go, the awareness of the consciousness will not be able to go any further until it comes down and meets the undeveloped parts of matter that would allow it to lift up and meet the new consciousness. I believe that's it. I mean, you made accomplishment and success and these things as an individual be more important than this more natural, simple part of yourself. And this healing is when you bring the spiritual self to this, and it will lift up. And then the need component quiets. But remember, need is always coming from the biological record of your impressions. So the need may have nothing to do with the food, or the need have nothing to do with the actual sense of touch. It's coming from the software component of the need that we add to it, and we make it into a story, and we use it as evidence of our unworthiness or our worthiness or whatever that may be. So human beings do this not just with sex, we do it with everything. What you want to do is get down to the kernel. And the kernel of all our suffering is the unmet parts of our body, unmet parts in our body. Okay, so there's something else there. You said a piece, but where are you right now?
But there's just a lot of energy in my third and my heart as well.
Okay.
And I guess like the question that I would want to ask, because everything you say I can follow, but how to discriminate, like how to know when I'm perpetuating and when I'm actually healing.
Yes, that it's the outcome. What you're perpetuating will keep you in suffering. What you're healing will bring peace and relaxation. Okay. And you're going to do this by trial and error, because you're not going to know, because the consciousness that gets needy is a diminished consciousness. So it has less discrimination.
Yeah.
And therefore, what will happen is that diminished consciousness will use the intellect to get confused or to try to explain or to understand what's happening to it. And that just gets in the way of the mood that's arising, the need that's arising, because everything that's arising will go. if we don't feed it. It is always, this is nature. This is the gunas, cycles. If we feed it, then we get this, and that's the imbalance. If we don't feed it, a natural rhythm comes, and yeah, okay, I'm needy right now. It's the moon cycle, whatever it would be, and or I'm in anguish, or I'm in my self-doubt loop that I feed on myself. But that's your software. That's why you want to stay in your body rather than let the story have any say, the confusion have any say, the shame have any say. That, and just keep staying in the body. Then you find that natural rhythm. Now, you will find this, Susanna, you will find this. It's just because you're at that stage of life where you've reached what everybody else expected of you. And now you're finding what you expect of yourself and how to dismantle the two so that you can be in the right relationship with the truth, the whole truth of you, not someone else's truth, and not just your own truth. So that this kind of maturing, and it takes time. So what you got to do is have a way of holding it until it finally resolves enough where the structure of the poignant pain quiets and becomes just a rhythm. Okay? And you got all this energy going through your body. You got the spiritual side is already developed, and it's impatient with the human side that hasn't yet caught up. Yeah,
Definitely.
No.
Thank you so much. And Sachi Maria, I love to hear from you too as well.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
Topic. So.
I think that so when we had the trainer only program with Mariana 2 days ago, and we brought up a big piece of the feminine. So I think I was trying to articulate what I wanted to say to you, and I actually think that I just want to do a Zoom call with you and let's have a conversation. But one thing, has Tonya recommended that you read Untamed? Okay, so that would be a good book to start with, because the woman in there goes through a journey that's quite a journey.
And it's a natural
You
unfolding.
haven't read it yet,
But I know that I recognized it.
But it is, she's, over a long period of time, and she comes to some pretty amazing recognitions and realizations of herself, not even being on a quote spiritual path. But a part of it was this recognition that we live with pain. It's just a part of what we live with. We have happy days and we have sad days, and we have pain. And if we hold on to the pain and try to do something with it, we often create suffering. So if you resist the pain, you create suffering. You know this is what better than, we all know this. So read that book. It's on Kindle. Okay, I will pull it out. We're going to put it on the thing.
And we'll move on.
And then we're going to move on. But one thing I did want to say is this spiritual community, there is no rule about touching or hugging or anything. I know that when we were with our other spiritual community many years ago, everybody was like, oh no, we just do this. We don't touch, we don't hug. That is not here in this community. There is no rule about that. So just in case, because a lot of times there are unspoken rules. That should not be an unspoken rule here. Okay. So if you guys hug, or I know a lot of times right now we're all kind of avoiding hugging each other because of the COVID. Good reason. But just saying that to this community, those who live here in Washoe Valley, more in particular, there is no rule. Satri has no, you can't do that. So, and read, and we're going to put the name of the book and the author up on the screen before we finish, because we are definitely going to have a conversation. And Kali Ma was on there. I know she's there. There's two Kali Ma's. This is the Kali Ma in Boston. I haven't forgotten you. We are still going to be talking about feminine principles. So anyway, Susanna.
All right, Susanna. Bye-bye.
And Angela.
Oh, she's not there.
She's right there.
Yeah,
she was in the meeting.
Yes, good.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Up
you.
next, we have Bridget.
Bridget,
Oh, good.
welcome.
Yay.
Wow. I don't know where to start. So been married 11 years, very happily, and sex was always normal, like every couple, no problems. And then since I met you and been on this journey, everything has kind of fallen away, and that's one of them. But what's interesting, as I sat here and I raised my hand, I have all this grief that's coming up, and I think part is the spiritual transformation that's happening, but there's a lot of grief around sex for me, and I've had 2 abortions. I was date raped the first time I ever had sex, and then I looked at all my past relationships, and there has been a lot of healing that I've had going through you. There's been so much like structures coming up. But I realized in so many of my relationships, sex was like this duty, and it was like how I had to service a man, and it was this requirement almost. And I realized I have this little anger and frustration and just like this disgust that I had to play that role. And so this awareness is happening, and luckily my husband right now is so understanding. He's just like whatever I need. Anyway, yeah.
Okay, well, that's a lot. And no, I got it, Bridget. And you, what's happening for you? What happens when the consciousness starts expanding significantly from where it was before? The senses fall away in their importance. The pleasures that we got through the body, the touch, the sense, the sight, the smell, the taste, the habits of feeding, the habits of distracting ourselves, they lose their importance because we're becoming more and more self-sufficient in the truth of our own self. There comes a point where this is actually transformative. That means literally it's dissolving the structures that create need in the first place, psychological need in the first place. The physical needs will remain, but the psychological component starts reducing and reducing and reducing and reducing until it's just sex. There's no romance. There's no anything. You can't even create it. It's just the act of sex. So it's a death. It's a death of the vital enhancement, because the vital nature, the desire nature, the life nature, combined with our human consciousness is what creates all these stories. It's what creates all the drama. It's what takes the little thing and makes it into much more than it is. And the important things, it makes it much less than it is. It's the Maya principle of the life force. When that goes away, then the entire foundation of the drives that motivated us as a human being start dying. And that part of our ego that's invested with it feels like life is going away. It's like a death. It's a dying of. And what's a natural and appropriate response is a grieving of your old self by the part of you that has not yet let go of it. So it's a grieving, and it's appropriate, because what you do in exchange is then it's no longer you motivating your life. It's the spiritual current that in the vital nature was constricted to self-interest, but in the transparent and open vital, a current for the purpose for the world. So our empty vital, the death of the vital, is like the death of the caterpillar. In order for some kind of different being to come forward that doesn't live on the self-interest that existed previously. So it's humbling. Yeah. And it's then you're also, when you get down to I call it the bottom of the barrel, where the vital is finally giving up, you discover all these places where you sold out your individual personal truth to get along, to fit in, to get security, to play the part society tells you you have to play, to keep you safe, to keep it having what it is that you want in life, the compromises you've made. All of that starts getting met. And so you look at that part of you looks for someone to blame. And men's a good target for women, as through the verse. So when you really start meeting these structures, they're shared. They're the shared wounding of the feminine in the world. You know, having your first introduction to sex rape is clear that you're here to carry a piece of that wounding, to meet it as an experience in your body, not as a strategy to have your life be better in a different way, but rather as a meeting of the collective pain of all women who have had to compromise and sell out their own individual possibility for those things society told them or the parents told them or was modeled for them by others. And you know, there is this battle between our individual will and our need for development and what's allowed, and that's all within that whole domain of human development. And for women, the rebellion against that is now more available, but it used to be not even an option. So you can rebel, and therefore a woman can now, in the more modern period, actually go through the screw you, I'm going to do what I want, you know, be it women, animals, whatever, you know, I want the freedom to discover myself. And then that quiets, because that's a phase two, a developmental phase two. But if we're not allowed to go through our rebellion, then you're stuck. You're stuck because in essence, you sold yourself out for fitting in, being liked, being seen a certain way, for social position, for security, all those things. And what is that? That's where we betrayed the individual unfolding of ourselves for something outside of ourselves that was ultimately prevented us from completing a phase of our independent journey into life. Now, you're a very independent woman. It just hasn't had the full expression in this category. So you're discovering the parts of your undeveloped self, the remaining strategies that got you to the place where you could have the awakening you have and have the material support that you have so that it can go places where it couldn't go otherwise. So it's perfect that you are where you are. It's perfect that you have the husband that you have. And now it's just a matter of you keep recognizing what it is to be able to have the right context for the divinity that's unfolding in you. Because once you get over you, what you discover is that you're divine. And you're discovering that already. You're actually a powerful channel already. So the whole principle here is even the ego will collaborate when we recognize the freedom, the usefulness, the love, the aliveness that happens when we let go of our old self. So that's where you are. And yes, there's a sadness, and you know, take care of that. Know that, recognize that. But it's not something that can be healed because it's dying. It's going to die. So it's in hospice already. So you don't want to make them feel better about dying. You're going to say, you're going to die, get ready. You got to have the right attitude here.
It's a major death. Death is the perfect word.
Okay, then very good. You got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Erica is up next.
Erica.
Hello.
Hello. Erica, have we met?
No, not yet. I'm
Okay.
new here.
All right. Well, good. Hello,
Where are you
Erica.
calling from? Or where are you in?
Country.
From Holland.
Holland. Okay.
And who's the gentleman with the goatee sitting with
Marcel.
Hi, I'm Marcel.
Marcel?
Hi,
All right.
Marcel.
Good. Good to meet you both. Okay, Erica, let's there.
Yes. In 2006, Kundalini process started with me. And it started when I had just broken up a relationship that was really demanding and heavy on my shoulders. And I had no home anymore. I had to live with my parents again and sat in the garden. And I looked at the flower and I imagined, how is it to be the flower myself? And then the Kundalini opened. So all my cells opened. And it was a really orgastic life force energy through my body.
There you go. There's the Kundalini Shakti.
Yeah.
But that is truly, it's an event that comes from nature. So it rises from below, from the experiential, from the outside, and it comes up through our body, and our body is the means. This is the way that the body awakens to that current of Satchitananda that comes from below and rises for above.
Yeah. So I had that experience for like several months, like 15 times a day, and then my life evolved and relationships and things, and I've had a few other more heavy relationships, and then it went better. I got him. We're together
So
6 years.
either you got better and you found him, or he helped
yeah.
you get better, right? Not
And
sure who's the chicken or the egg here, right?
so in 2014, we went to Argentina, and I had another phase of awakening that I started bowing for divine all of a sudden, and my hands jerked up, and I had spontaneous namastes and spontaneous meditative states, and I almost couldn't drive my car because it was too dangerous, because I started going into meditative states, and it went on, and so I have lots of spiritual things happening, and in that with sexuality, then it went almost, it was a sort of difficult to have like normal sex, because if you are in that space of
Transcendence. Yeah.
then it's sort of, I have my little trip, sort of,
Mhm.
and he's really sweet with me, but I'm sort of in this trance thing, and how to connect while I have whole things happening, and how to do sort of together. That was a search for me, so how am I gonna do that? And not so long after that, I got very ill. I got Lyme disease, like for 5 years almost now, and that ill that I don't have energy at all anymore for having sex also. So it's been a really sort of, how is this happening? How to do with this?
Got
And
it.
I've become sort of really shy with having sex, and also some things that is healing all the time, and in process, and also I didn't want to have sex because I didn't want to infect him, maybe if that was possible, get him sick from me, so that blocked me in my wanting to have contact. And
Okay.
yeah, I'm getting better in my energy,
Yes.
but how is the process now? Yeah, how to do?
All right. Well, you've heard me describe a little bit. You're describing almost the same journey I went through, in terms that I first went through experiential, the Kundalini awakening. It didn't organize like traditional, but it eventually became organized like traditional. And then I went to what you are now, where you're going out of the individual embodied transformation into the universal awareness, where you're meeting what I call this principle of truth, or the supreme. And this takes us out of our body. I mean, it's many people awaken first into that and they lose all interest in human life. But if you went through the experiential, then you come to that, it's like an additive rather than something needs to be subtracted. And what's happened now is that in order for this new consciousness that's come to you recently, relatively recently, there's parts of your system that are not, I mean, it's always going to happen. The consciousness gets set, the higher the consciousness goes, the more deep into the unmet structures of your embodiment have to be met. And it's not something you do. It happens automatically because your consciousness gets brighter and you see the darkness. You meet the darkness and your consciousness gets even brighter and you meet the next layer of darkness. So it is the process that you will be in until there is a completion point, Erica, for this. And that's what I didn't ever believe there was going to be a completion point. And that completion point, that worship that was coming to you, that's what I call it. You get brought to worship. When you get to worship, that's you, you're your essential being recognizing the supreme. I call it the supreme. I don't call it the divine mother. I call it supreme being. It's not male or female. It's a principle of which male and female arise. And it is the highest state, in my experience, possible, because when it comes, it's all complete. There's no longer any question that there's anything else needed at all or anything missing at all, that everything is full and complete in every single moment. So you're in this process, this last piece of the integration of your awareness with your mature experience. But this Kundalini awakening allowed you to bypass structures of your psychological self that are associated with your body, that you inherited from your mother, that you inherited from her mother, from your father, your relatives. These are now part of the collective unconscious, undeveloped parts, immaturity of mankind that we all carry. The thing that is so important to understand is what's happened to you was intelligent and purposeful. It was to wake you up to that true authority that you are, where there is no longer doubt or question. So if you can recognize that everything is purposeful, the Lyme disease was purposeful, the falling away of the sexuality was purposeful, it will come back, but it will come back only when the balance between the consciousness and the matter, the spirit and matter, have come to greater resolution. When that completes, when those two come to balance at the highest state, you know that you're embodied divine. It's like, I am. There's no separation. There's me as a person. It's equal to me as a divine being. They're not different. They're not higher or lower, better or worse. And then we become useful for the world. So I wanted to give you that context. I don't know how much you've been following my teachings, but it is specifically so you can understand that nature is awakening her children so they can support and help her in this world transition. And that there has never been a time when there's been more spontaneous Kundalini awakenings in the world, because the mother principle can't do this transition. She needs something from a higher state of consciousness to inject into matter that mankind can do in its current state of consciousness. So we all have to wake up so that we can lift matter up to the next vibration level so we can make it through this transition. Okay, so I'm delighted to meet both of you. And I recommend that you just start listening to my talks, especially in the Bhagavad Gita, the second series of talks, starting from chapter 12 and on, all the way through. You'll find yourself, the revelations that I've given that are on transcripts or videos, they will help support you.
Okay, yeah.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Next up is Hugh and Nella.
Hi,
Hey.
Ivanella. Namaste.
Hey guys, good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Well, first of all, I want to say, Shree, that my heart was pumping and touching my ear about the freedom that I hear when you talk about finding your own self. It makes me be magnetized to your teachings. And at the moment, as you were talking, as you said to me one time, my Dharma was to heal my ancestors and the South American and the Latin demographics. I also teach Zumba, which is a lot of movements, and it's a very embodied practice I do, and also oriented to fitness. I love about that is just the movement that I put music from all around the world. To me, movement on Latin or Egyptian or different rhythms, I feel to embody the wholeness of the humanity, really. However, a lot of those moves are very sensual, very sexy. I recognize me being from South America. I have that expression in me that it feels, I wanted to, it's like a bird. I wanted to show with my moves. I want to, and then I also sometimes receive the energy from the male being kind of inhibit my expression. So I find myself sometimes constrained, but at the same time, that's what I like the dance, because I feel free. So I don't know the question. I guess I want to leave it open. In what way, what I do, it could be of service of healing, the free expression of women, and also the, I don't know, the transcendence of all this paradigm about what is appropriate to move, what is not, and to be free of expression. Because to me, being a mother is being fluorescent, vibrant. When I see the flowers, when I see nature, and I find sometimes doubt um, about what is it that I'm acting that is looking for to be seen, or what is I'm acting that is a really self-expression of the self.
Okay, very good.
Thanks.
I got it, Nella. Thank you. All right, there's a struggle in all of us between our dependency and independency, our wanting to stand independent and our wanting to be met, our needs being met. So this struggle is in all of us, women and men. And the freedom that you've experienced, the discovery that you experienced, is an interface between spirit and matter, where they're playing with each other. That there's an ascendancy of spirit and the matter is lifted up to play with spirit. And dance is a wonderful way of reconciling any imbalance that may be occurring in that dance. And you're on this threshold of the self, where the ratio of spirit and matter have come together. And probably for a period of time, there was sufficiency in the work you were doing and the healing you were doing, the role you had for yourself, and it was consistent with your experience of yourself. So the experience and the awareness was the same, but something has shifted. Probably I shifted it. And not that I did it, but I became, coming into your life through Hugh, and now directly through me, is this awareness is shifted. And the old adaptation is, though good and valid, is no longer sufficient. And what's calling you, that thing in your heart that beats so fast, that's the purpose of your existence, getting activated in a new way, where the old structures, though they did work, are not going to be able to work anymore if you wish for this consciousness to have its fulfillment. Because in that case, it's not about you, the life force mother, healing the world. It's about you getting out of the way so that the world mother can heal the world through you. And that's a paradigm where the individuality's investment in certain outcomes has to be surrendered. The ego has to surrender what she's known, what worked before, so that something greater than that part of you can come into existence as you. So you're in the call and the cry. The call for the higher possibility has your heartbeat, and the cry is the sorrow of leaving that part of your vital nature that was useful, that brought healing, that gave you a sense of purpose and brought balance into your life. No, these do not ultimately have to be dropped. They will eventually be included, but for a period of time, you have to allow for this transition and let the vital die. Let the old part of you as an individual woman playing her role in her sexual role or in her role with her family and the community, and let that all go. Let the mother prepare you to actually be useful in the world in ways you have not yet been able to know or experience. That's my invitation. And for all the rest of you, it's a matter of capacities. I identified the 5 capacities. And each of us are in the spiritual path is proportional to our capacity to hold spirit, so it can be abiding. And the first capacity is just about me, ourself, our own happiness or our individuality. Don't really care as much about everybody else. We're the organizing principle of our life. The second capacity is when we include others, when we include the immediacy of our intimate lover or our children or our that immediate family, the whole family. That's number two. Number three is when we're concerned about our community, the immediate neighborhood, the perhaps the shared issue of women or the shared issue within your community of what's working and not working. So there's volunteering coming out of that third capacity. The fourth capacity is to recognize that you're actually connected to something much larger than your community. You're connected to your nation or to your whole sex, the whole idea of trauma of women or the trauma of inequality or cruelty or greed. And so these become our fourth capacity. And the fifth capacity is when we're here for the whole world. And if you look at how my arms went, from the first capacity to the fifth capacity, what is that a capacity? A capacity to be. Yes. Right? Good. That's where you're going. You're coming out of the smallness into the largeness, into a largeness that your arms couldn't possibly reach. All right, there you go, my dear. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah.
Up next, we have Yosino.
Okay.
Oh.
Yes,
Hi.
Hey, Yosin. Hello.
Namaste. I was about to lower my hand. There's a lot going on in my body at the moment. What first came up at the beginning of the talk was a lot of anger and sadness. That is connected. Yeah, I know there's an individual part, but there's also a collective part there.
Right.
And it's yeah, it's hard to talk.
So you can feel this in your body. You can feel this,
Yeah.
the struggle, and really much of this needs to just be allowed to be what it is, as the conflicting struggles, the anger and the sadness and the, whatever else is getting activated at the moment. So many times, every time we make a transition in the natural cycle of the guna, each day during the cycles of the moon, during cycles of the year, there is these transition periods. There's nothing you need to know during these transition periods, especially it's not something to understand or something to fix or something to compare or anything other than meeting it as where you are right now. And then do the thing that is there for you to do. Because the gunas will always be shifting. And this shifting, we don't want to feed. We just want to be where we are, whatever that transition is. So it's not important that anything more than you coming forward to be seen. And there is a part of you that still wants and needs to be seen in order to validate that you are where you need to be. That's where we're still relying outside of ourselves for our own ability to know we are right where we need to be. So keep inviting you to come to knowing that whatever is arising is right where you need to be, and that there's nothing necessary to do with that, but be where you are. So
yeah, but it feels very connected to this subject because it wasn't there before.
Yes.
And it's
yeah, this
it feels
nature,
like
it's because we're talking about the purpose ultimately. We're talking about our universal nature and our individual nature. So of course, it should. It should bring up what's next. That would be its purpose. And the whole conversation around sexuality and the spiritual path and our relationship with it, to avoid it, to meet it, to go beyond it, or to integrate it. So this is the inquiry in terms of the nature of this opportunity. And maybe that is where to come back to in your own relationship with your own sexuality and the role it's played in your life and your issues you have around that.
Yeah,
Then-
that's where I feel the anger is connected to, because it's so much about it was there. Yeah, it's so much about boundaries being crossed, not on an individual level, but also on the collective level. Not even able to express needs
Yeah.
because it's unsafe. The anxiety, yeah. So that's a lot, and I think that's where the anger is connected to. That's not. Maybe that's also connected to the part that wants to be seen.
Yep.
Is that feminine part that has never been recognized.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So
It doesn't feel like it's personal anymore, because that's what the individual wants to lower my hand. It's not
Very-
about that part, but it's just a collective feminine that's not being seen. That's yeah.
No, I mean, I think that you're pointing to a very critical part of this, Josine. A lot of women have this conversation. I was reading an article recently. Oh no, I was watching Michelle Obama. She has a documentary called Becoming on Netflix, and she speaks about always being visible. And she felt that I mean, it was never a question for her. She always felt visible. Now that doesn't mean she felt visible as a woman or as a man. I mean, it's just this whole experience of being seen. And I realized that many of us have never felt seen. We weren't seen in our families. We're not seen in our society. So it's a missing thing. So I don't know if the anger is around that or not, but it's just to notice that.
Yeah.
It's just to
Well,
notice.
it's yeah. It's I think it's about that part also, when speaking up, to be put down, or to be told to shut up, or yeah. So and that's also related to sex. It's just meeting men's needs, and not even being able to express, or even have learned to express your needs, because it was unsafe to and life-threatening for a lot of women. Still, yeah. So that's yeah.
When you make the transition from the individual to the universal, your issues are issues in the collective to be worked out through your issues, so that as we're all 7.4 billionth of the problem. When we work out the part of us that's a problem, we solve that piece for the world, and that qualifies us to start taking on the other parts of the world that have not met these hidden. So we start our individual transformational process, then open space for all people who have similar structures in the collective consciousness. That's the power of our own process. So when we know it's not personal, then we don't add any more to it than it's what's arising right now.
And I can feel it. It feels like it weighs a ton now in my body. It just feels like pressing down, but it's yeah.
It's so simple. We always want to reduce this thing to the most simple, where we don't add software to it. We don't add story, content, vital reactions, past patterns to it. We keep it simple. And that is this is what's the struggle. I can say and recognize a struggle. I can find the bits and pieces of it that I have some information about, and there are bits and pieces of it that have not yet unfolded. And my job is to eat the elephant. That is always whatever is arising that we have not yet learned how to be with. So there it is.
Yeah.
There you go.
It feels like the elephant's on top of me now. I'm here, but yeah.
That's quite intimate, right? That's quite intimate moments. The elephant's on top of you. You're really right where you need to be. Yeah, I hadn't.
Thank you.
What about having sex with the elephant, right?
Oh.
That could be like too much, right? Wouldn't we?
Yeah.
I know the experience. It has happened. So, all right.
Yeah, that hits note, because that's what it feels like. It feels like just, yeah. That really hits the physical experience.
Good. See, you talk about death and you talk about sex, and it resonates, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I might have to find the strength to first push it off me.
Well, no, you're going to become the elephant.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
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 I mean,
Hmm.
that's what happens, right? With sex, right? You become the other. I mean, that's why it's union. So it's not about getting rid of it, or even the reason we eat it is to become it. But if eventually you're squashed, well, you're just going to be a stain on the elephant and you will be the elephant.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the anger is coming up again. No.
Now,
You know, what I would say to that is notice that it's coming up.
yeah.
Take no action
Yeah.
on that, because
I won't. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know,
Because you're just meeting this for every other young woman
Yeah.
that is out there in this, you know, in the universe, in the collective. That's what you're doing.
Yeah.
You
And it's also the physical remembrance of being not by an elephant, but just not being able to move anywhere. And yeah.
you've discovered actually your own will as an individual. You have. And it is a blessing and a curse, because then it defines territory about what it's willing to be with, right? Will is that which determines if we're willing or not. So when we have our own self-will that's bound by our ego, we cannot actually will something greater to come until we've met that part of our ego that doesn't want to let go of its willfulness. So opening up to something beyond ourselves would be a willful choice of that which would not otherwise do that. So that's the paradox of individual will in relationship to the greater will that has yet to demonstrate itself. And that act of surrender, that's the act of surrender. We call it sacrifice, but it's also surrender to going beyond what we would want to have, or what still defines our protection structure that preserves our self-will, because that's on the basis of ego rather than our true will, where we're unwilling to be unprotected, vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's connected to survival, to literal survival in this case, in the physical experience. So that makes it a bit
when you have something
a challenge to surrender to it.
You've given power to something outside of yourself, unwittingly in the past or currently because of the conditioning. You become the victim of that. So when you can withdraw the power you've given to approval from others, then you can begin to recover that part of energy that is fed that there could be anything greater than you, anything more valid than you, anything more real than yourself. And then then when that completes, you are that which you were being overtaken by. And it disappears. It literally disappears in the inequality. The whole thing of my will, your will disappears. When
it feels to be that there's also but I would like to hear your opinion about it, that there's the risk of spiritual bypassing.
Careful, we don't want to have, I mean, it's true, the language of bypassing has been projected into the spiritual path more than I believe it deserves. There is the issue of transcendence and transformation. Yes, those are valid, but I wouldn't bring that up as a question about is this right or this wrong? Because right now the process that's occurring for you is going to reveal itself in clarity when the time is right. And that if it's bypassing or not, I assure you, ego is the only thing that would want to bypass. Truth wants to include everything. Doesn't want to miss anything. Wants everything.
Yeah.
Ego wants to say, okay, I got this much capacity, I can't handle any more than this much, or this much, or this much, whatever it may be. So
and in meeting it all and surrendering to it all, it's also surrendering to the trauma that's connected to bringing it up in the individual.
It's all there with you right now in the wholeness of you. All right, Suzanne. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yosi, sorry, I'm calling you wrong thing. Okay, someone else.
Yes, up next, Bent.
What was the name again?
Bent.
Hey.
Okay.
Have we met before?
I met you in Sweden a couple of years ago.
Okay. All right. Good
No
to
talk.
see you. All right.
you know, I ask because I feel I'm in a place that's new. I had some kind of awakening 4 or 5 years ago, like Christ coming into the heart, and then I've been for years I've just been not struggling, but going through death after death after death, experience and rebirth on personal levels, and going into death and rebirth and cosmic levels also. And then I've had this very strong intuition to also being guided to always go beyond and also go into the unmanifest, where everything's just like being in a nuclear bomb or something like that. Just everything disappears, and then that, and it's like sacrificing everything to just keep on going to that place. But then what happened is that a couple of weeks ago, it was just like I was just put into my body and I became a human. And then it's like this whole striving just, you know, it disappeared. Now I get touched by saying it. And then now I'm just a simple fool, you know.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful what I'm seeing. This is a very mature place that you're in right now. This is the embodiment of your awakening. Everything that died is given capacity for birth. You're now you again, but from a complete different place than you were you before. And you're in the wonder and the humility and the awe. And of course you have no clue because you just stepped out of the cocoon and you're in a world, and now you can fly. You never knew you could fly before. You're in a freedom, and you're in an immediacy and in a wonder of existence from a complete, real, more true, more real paradigm than you could have known before, where it was just the absolute. Because that's what was happening. You were coming to this, what I call the Sat, and you want nothing. I mean, ultimately, consciousness wants to just return to source, and the Sat's the source. So why would you go anyplace else but there? But then you have a body still. And so inevitably, the Sat will descend back into the body and say, okay, how can I make room for myself here? So then everything that doesn't make room for that greater truth dies, gets killed off, gets what I call transformed. Okay, so did you have guidance for any of this, or was it all natural? Did you have a teacher? Did you have someone to guide you through it?
Yes, some of the way. My primary guidance has just been the impulse to actually go through death and then just take what comes, and then to see this thing beyond, and just
we have
see.
someone in our community who's just had the same thing happen in India. So, except for you, it's been time. You spent how long since that process started? When
it started 4.5 years ago, like Christ come into the heart, and then Christ also came into the sacred bone later. So, yeah.
Good. All right, so this is the same thing. This is the new possibility that's occurring on the planet, where beings are being awakened by a collaboration between the Supreme Being and the World Mother. And she's taking over the process so that beings like yourself can wake up to your purpose on the planet now, because now you're useful.
Yes, I understand, but yeah, I understand I'm useful. But
how do I do it?
The reason I ask is, if I don't ask you, I might just, go out and go for a walk and keep on just walking around the neighborhood,
Well,
and
yeah, I got it. We know what that feels like. And, so just get involved. We have training programs that assist to give you a structure that will help you bring the best of what's come with the best of the person of you, and to move into relationship with existence in this new quality of being that you are, because it'll always be love. It'll be the call of the cry of the human being still trapped in the era of its embodiment that will call and want to be with you and want to hear from you and want to be learn from you. So we come for that purpose. We come and descend back into the world to lift the world. And that
But I'm just losing you now because like before I got very touched, now I just lost you. Maybe I just got confused.
No.
So
Where in Sweden are you?
I think what I really want to ask is like, just what can I orient towards here when it feels right to have no orientation besides just like, it's so simple, the orientation. It's like, I mean, I can't tell a fool from a genius. I can't tell a demon from an angel. I mean, but so how do I orient? I mean, it feels good, but there's still this hint that I'm here in the body, but it's still important as that. But at the same, I mean, I just asked for orientation.
I have this conversation with the person who comes to me, who's in our community all the time. And it is a continuous, how do I come into existence now? Right? That's what it is. How do I do this tomorrow? The next 10 minutes, the next hour? How do I do this immediacy? Because everything's coming all at once. What role do I have to play? All right, what's asking those questions is the human part of you that has not yet learned to collaborate with what's happened. So the first thing you can do is get information. Begin to understand what it is that's happened to you. This takes years because the mind's stupid and it has to be trained to know these things. So, but your intuition is going to tell you, this is true, this is not true. This is real, this is not real. And in time, the strength of what has come to you will become embodied. It'll be the person of you will be in alignment with this. So I'm the same as you. These two have come together. No separation between me and divine, between a person that brings evil intent and a person that brings good intent. I can't tell the difference. I have Satsang to tell the difference. Because as far as I'm concerned, everything's exactly correct, just like it is. But when you embody, you learn to become discerning, where you create a new kind of discernment based on truth, not based on ego and mind, that is able to see the agendas.
But I used to have that. I used to have complete clearance and being able to see through people like X-rays, you know, and see everything.
Yeah,
but now everything's just beautiful souls walking around, and some of them beat me, and some of them
embrace you. Yeah, it could be either way. So, and you could listen to this. This is your future. Okay, so it is love. Love is the most thing that you bring, but it doesn't have to express itself. It doesn't have to do anything. It's a quality of truth coming into existence through you. So the way I would say, you're going to figure this out by getting right information, but also by taking actions aligned with the role the universe wants for you. It's all I talk about. Hmm. I'm just what, maybe 9 years further along in the process.
But can I tell you one thing, like the only guidance I got, because 4.5 years I got the pure impulse that says, just you, I was like on the verge, either you die, I die out of my soul disintegrates, or I say yes to feeling everything. And I just said, yes, I will experience everything. And then I just gone through hell, because I said yes to that, right?
And same thing happened to me. I had the choice.
You had that choice?
I had a choice. And I chose the world. I chose to serve world. I chose the world. I chose to serve the world mother. I'm just very touched by this, what you just shared there, because that was a profound embodiment for me, coming to responsibility what I had become, and that I'm here. I am here to serve the world, and everything I do and live has been to deepen and increase and expand my capacity to do so. So it's your path. I believe you're on the. Go ahead. You're gonna have a million questions. There's no way we can handle it in the time we have left. So I suggest you write to newdharma@gmail, ask for a meeting with me. Okay? And we'll go and we'll take an hour and we'll explore this so that you can understand and you know, I can support you in whatever way you need to be able to make the next step. Otherwise, we're all honored by this sharing. I want to just thank you. Namaste.
Thank you, Brent.
Okay.
I think you're
All right.
we're done.
So that we're done. That's all. That was the crescendo. So it is going to be. We are going to always end these talks with that which has not yet been allowed to come forward. It is an opening to an opportunity of discovering and exploring your relationship with existence, and along whatever theme, in this particular one around your sexuality, that may arise, in order to expand what happens between you and us in your journey until we meet again. So this process of continuously bringing what is still incomplete, what still wants to be resolved, of still sensing the opportunity, but is not able to eat of it yet. It's like having a huge meal and you're only getting chicken. It is this opportunity that you want to rest with, of the possibility of what is this spiritual path? What is the right relationship with this? Who am I in this journey? And what am I becoming? Is really just to hold that and to stay in the immediacy and the freshness of what's then possible on that threshold of that which is not yet known, that which is not yet experienced. Okay, so let's just take a few minutes.
I want to say hello to the Gothenburg Sangha. There's a whole bunch of them that are on. They're all waving.
Yay!
Great to see all of you here.
Yes. All right, so we're gonna
Now
just
you
take
can do
a
your thing.
few minutes of silence to complete it, and then we will meet again, I assure you. All right. So come back to yourself, into your body. Be aware of your breath. Be with yourself, alone with you right now. Breathing. Be aware of the energy in your body. Notice if there's blockages or pressure. Notice the nature of the quality of experience that's going on. And breathe. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat. Hari Om Tat Sat Shree. All glory to Supreme. May truth manifest. Namaste.